This is the Berlin Wall, and this is Hot Air Balloon. On board are Peter Strelzik and 3 other members. This is their second attempt to escape East Berlin. It is a quiet night and everything is going great. But suddenly, they began to descend at extreme speed. Just moments earlier, a wet cloud had soaked the balloon, and the extra weight started pulling them down. Seconds later, they crash. But this is not their final attempt. Just 2 months later, they will try again. This is a story of the greatest Berlin Wall escape in history. After World War II, Germany was divided into East and West, and Berlin was divided in the same manner, even though the entire city was located within East Germany. At first, people could still travel between East and West Berlin, but the East was losing too many of its citizens, especially young, educated workers, to the West. So in 1961, the East German government made a decision. On the night of August 13th, they began sealing off the border. Over the next weeks and months, the wire turned into a wall made of concrete, lined with fences, watchtowers, and a deadly strip of sand and landmines. It stretched for over 150 kilometers, completely surrounding West Berlin. Peter and Gunter both worked together as self-employed electricians. They lived in East Berlin, and for them, life was tough. The Socialist Unity Party of Germany held tight control over people's lives. Freedom of speech was non-existent, and the ability to travel and move around was limited. Like most East Berliners, Peter and his friend Gunter Fetzel wanted to escape. But escaping the Berlin Wall was almost like a mission impossible. If you tried to flee East Berlin on foot, you would be met with multiple obstacles. The first layer of defense was a hinterland wall. This wall was between 3 and 4 meters high. It was made of concrete, and to make matters worse, the top was covered with barbed wire. Now, let's say that you brought the ladder and hopped over the barbed wire. You would reach the next obstacle. This was a 3-meter tall electric fence, which was connected to an alarm system. Any contact with the fence would turn on the acoustic and optical alarm. This would ultimately alert the patrol. In the middle of the wall was a patrolled road. During the night, bright floodlights lit up the road, which allowed the guards to have a better view. Guards were positioned on the watchtowers as well as on the ground. This is the BT-11 watchtower. Along the 155 kilometers of the Berlin Wall, there were a total of 302 towers that guarded the wall. From here, guards had a much better view to spot and shoot down anyone who tried to escape. They were equipped with a radio that allowed for fast communication, as well as 35mm cameras and binoculars. During the lifespan of the Berlin Wall, there were between 100 and 150 casualties who lost their lives trying to cross the wall. 92 of them were shot by patrol guards. Next in line we have Hedgehog anti-vehicle obstacles. These were landmines designed to stop any larger vehicle trying to cross the wall. From small cars to larger military vehicles, these obstacles were almost impossible to overcome. And finally we have a boundary wall. This was the last obstacle that stood between you and West Berlin. It was a L-shaped wall made of reinforced concrete, topped with a cement tube. This tube worked as an anti-grip feature that prevented escapees from getting any grip. If you managed to cross this wall, you have successfully fled East Berlin. But in 99% of cases, this was not the result. Gunter and Peter knew that they stood no chance of crossing the wall on foot, so they started planning other ways of escaping. The idea for a hot air balloon came from a magazine, a balloon festival in Albuquerque. Gunter read it and Peter agreed to give it a go. For their first attempt, they visited leather shops in search of material used for shoe linings. However, in order not to be suspicious, they said that they needed material for making tents. Gunter then used an old sewing machine, and from his bedroom he worked day and night trying to turn it into a usable balloon. Finally, they wanted to test it in an open field. However, Peter thought he saw someone, so they got frightened and rushed to pack the balloon and put it into the trunk of a car. Because they did it so fast, they forgot to close the trunk properly. So while driving, the balloon fell from the trunk and was dragged on the road, which resulted in destroying the balloon. In the end, nothing could be done to fix it, so they burnt it. For the second attempt, they tested many materials that they could use for a new balloon design. Gunter found that taffeta, which was a crisp, smooth fabric used for making curtains, was a good material for making a hot air balloon. This time they pretended to come from a sailing club, searching for a larger quantity of taffeta. However, this material poses some risks. When they tested the burner, they noticed that the balloon was not being fully inflated. This was also the moment when Gunter and Peter started to argue. Gunter wanted to find other ways of escaping, while Peter still insisted on pursuing a hot air balloon escape plan. That's when second attempt happened. Peter, his wife and their 2 kids went out to a field where they prepared for an escape. They got the burner working, but as they rose into the sky, they noticed that taffeta was soaking up too much water, resulting in additional weight, which the burner couldn't handle. Just moments later, they hit the ground. But even though this attempt was unsuccessful, just a few months later, Peter and Gunter would start working together on preparing the final attempt to escape East Berlin. A couple of minutes after midnight, Peter, Gunter and their families drove to the place where they would give another try to escape East Berlin, hoping this time would be their last. With an improved burner, they started inflating the balloon, and soon they were in the sky. But they were consuming a lot more fuel than they initially planned on. Because of the small hole in the fabric, the burner had to be turned on all the time, which was using too much fuel. Soon they were 2,000 meters above the ground. Because of this height, police couldn't spot them in the sky. But at this point they had lost too much fuel, so they started to fall. They didn't know if they made it or not. Finally, after 28 minutes of airtime, they landed in the bushes. As they got out of the crashed balloon and started walking down the road, they noticed a police car approaching. Luckily, it was a West Berlin police officer. Are we in the West?
Yes, of course.
Despite an oppressive regime and limited materials, Gunter and Peter designed a genius escape. But if you happen to live in East Berlin in 1968, what would be your way of trying to cross the Berlin Wall? Write your solution in the comments, and if you want to see more of this content, please subscribe.